Sell the lake house or your nephew goes to prison. That was the first thing my mother said to me when she walked into my office. No knock, no hello, just that sentence dropped on my desk like a subpoena. My brother stood behind her with his hands jammed in his pockets, and his wife wouldn't meet my eyes. They had driven 2 hours to tell me my own house wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to the family now, and the family had decided. I didn't get up. I didn't raise my voice. I just set down my pen and looked at the three of them lined up in front of me like a collections agency, and I thought, so this is how it ends. Or maybe how it begins. I had spent 31 years being the person this family reached for when something needed paying, and I had finally figured out that you can only be the wallet for so long before they stop seeing the person attached to it. My name is Harlow. I'm a forensic accountant. People hire me to follow money that doesn't want to be followed, to open the books that someone spent a lot of effort closing, and to stand up in a deposition and explain in plain English exactly how a number got from where it was supposed to be to where it actually went. I am very good at my job. I am good at it because I grew up in a house where money disappeared all the time, and I was never allowed to ask where it went. You learn to read a room when you grow up like that. You learn to read a bank statement even faster. The nephew in question was Tristan, my brother's kid, 24, and gifted in the way that ruins people early. He'd been handed a sales job at a logistics company straight out of school because my brother knew the owner, and within 2 years, Tristan had been promoted to handling client accounts, which meant he had access to a corporate card and a set of invoices and not nearly enough supervision. Now there was a discrepancy. $41,000 of one, to be specific, and an internal review starting Monday, and my brother had decided that the cleanest solution was for me to sell the place on the lake that my grandmother left me and write a check to make the hole disappear before anyone counted too carefully. To understand why I didn't just throw all three of them out of my office, you have to understand how my family was built. I used to think every family had a designated provider, the way every car has a spare tire bolted in the trunk, useless and ignored until the day everything goes flat. In my family, that was me. My brother was the prince. From the time he could walk, he was the one with potential, the one whose feelings mattered, the one whose mistakes got softened into stories. And I was the one with responsibility, which in our house was just a polite word for blame. If he broke something, I should have been watching. If he failed something, I should have helped him study. If he wanted something, I should have wanted less. They never said it cruelly. That's the part outsiders never understand. My parents weren't villains twirling mustaches. They genuinely believed that pouring everything into him and skimming it off me was just good economics. The way you water the plant that's already blooming and let the other one make do with whatever rain falls. They thought they were being practical. That belief is far more dangerous than cruelty because cruelty knows it's wrong and practicality sleeps just fine. I remember the exact afternoon I understood the shape of my own life, even if I didn't have the words for it yet. I was 17. I'd been working at a coffee shop and a tutoring center and babysitting on weekends since I was 14, and I'd saved almost $6,000 toward college, kept in a savings account I'd opened myself the day I turned 16. More proud of that account number than of anything I'd ever owned. I came home one Thursday and my father was sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of paperwork and a look on his face like he was doing me a favor. The dealership had called. My brother needed a car for his new commute to the state school he was about to start, and a reliable used sedan had come up, and the smart thing, the family thing, was to consolidate. My savings would be the down payment. I would be helping. I would be investing in the family's future. I was 17, and I didn't know that you were allowed to say no to your own parents, so I sat there and watched my father slide a withdrawal slip across the table that already had the amount filled in. $5,800. The number I had counted in my head every night before I fell asleep. I went to community college and then to a state school myself, 2 years behind where I should have been, working the overnight desk at a hotel to pay for textbooks and sleeping through morning classes I'd paid for and couldn't afford to fail. My brother totaled that sedan within the year, drunk, walked away laughing, and my father bought him another one before the insurance even processed. Nobody asked me how I felt. Nobody ever did. They had a saying about me by then, repeated at every holiday with a laugh. Harlow's the responsible one. They meant it as praise. It took me years to hear it for what it was, which was a job description I'd never applied for. So no, I didn't throw them out of my office. I learned a long time ago that throwing people out only feels good for a minute. Instead, I let my shoulders drop. I let my face do the thing it had done for 31 years. The small collapse, the swallowing, the good girl nod. I put my hand over my mouth like I was trying not to cry, and I watched all three of them relax at the exact same moment, the way a room relaxes when the difficult part is over, because they thought the difficult part was getting me to fold and I had just folded right on schedule. Okay, I said. I can't let Tristan go to prison. He's a kid. Of course I'll help. My sister-in-law actually reached out and squeezed my hand. My brother let out a breath through his nose like a man who just closed a deal. And my mother? My mother smiled at me with what I think she genuinely believed was love, and said she always knew I'd come through, that I was the strong one, and I held that smile in my mind for later, the way you photograph a license plate. But there's a problem, I said, and I let my voice climb into something anxious, something helpless. I can't just hand you $41,000. Not like that. The lake house is an inherited asset. If I sell it and gift the proceeds, the IRS is going to want gift tax on anything over the annual exclusion, and we're way over. We could lose 10, 12,000 to taxes alone. And if I wire that kind of money straight into Tristan's account 3 days before an audit, that's the first thing the reviewers flag. It looks like exactly what it is. My brother frowned. He hated taxes more than he loved his son. Figure it out, he said. You're the accountant. There's one way, I said slowly, like I was working it out in real time. If the money isn't a gift, if it's restitution, it's treated completely differently. If Tristan repays the company directly and we document it as the correction of an accounting error, an inadvertent overpayment that he's voluntarily returning, then it's not income, it's not a gift. There's no tax, and the audit just sees a closed loop, a mistake that was caught and fixed. That's the kind of thing reviewers love. It makes the file look clean. I turned to my nephew, who'd been silent this whole time, sweating through his collar. But for it to work, you have to put it in writing, I said. You have to sign a statement that the funds were withdrawn in error and that this payment corrects it. Use the word inadvertent. It has to read like a bookkeeping mistake, not not anything else. If you sign that, the whole thing closes itself. He looked at his father. His father looked at me, and I watched the calculation happen behind his eyes, the same calculation I'd been counting on, which was that signing a piece of paper costs nothing and saving $12,000 is $12,000. Greed always wins that argument. I have built an entire career on the reliability of that fact. People will sign anything if you convince them it's saving them money, and they will never read the part that hangs them. I opened my laptop and pulled up a signing platform I use for client documents. The legitimate kind, the kind with a timestamp and an audit trail and an IP address attached to every signature, all of it admissible. I drafted a one-page affidavit that looked as boring as a parking ticket. Standard header, a line for the date, a line for the amount, and in the middle, under a field labeled reason for payment, I left a blank box. I emailed the links to Tristan's phone while they watched. Just fill in the reason, I told him. Write that it's an inadvertent withdrawal of company funds that you're correcting before the audit, then sign at the bottom. His phone buzzed. He opened it, and here is the thing I will remember for the rest of my life. He didn't hesitate. He didn't call a liar, didn't read it twice, didn't ask a single question. He was so frightened of the tax I'd invented that he never saw the trap I'd actually built. His thumbs moved across the screen and he typed, in his own words, that he had withdrawn company funds without authorization and was repaying them to resolve the discrepancy before the scheduled review. He pressed sign. My laptop chimed. Document completed. I opened a PDF, and there it was. His signature, time-stamped to the minute. His device, his location, his own sentence in his own phrasing, legally executed and binding under penalty of perjury. He hadn't signed a tax form, he'd signed a confession. He had stated in writing that he took money that wasn't his and tried to put it back before he got caught. Embezzlement in one tidy paragraph with a verified electronic signature. Done, he said, looking up, relieved. So you'll sell the house? I need a couple of days to get the listing right so it doesn't look like a fire sale, I said. The market's soft. If I dump it fast, I lose money we don't have to lose. Give me until the weekend. They believed me because people always believe you when you tell them what they want to hear. My mother hugged me on her way out and called me a good daughter, and I let her, and I watched the three of them drive off down the road thinking they'd won. And then I locked my office door and saved that PDF to 3 separate places and sat there in the quiet for a long time. I did not sell the lake house. The lake house was never the point. It was just the thing they thought I cared about. And people who want to control you always grab for the thing they think you care about, which is how you learn what they think of you. That night, I did something I'd been avoiding for years because I was afraid of what I'd find. I pulled my own full credit report, the detailed one, the kind that lists every account ever opened in your name and everyone who's ever had access to it. I'd checked my score before, the number at the top, and the number was fine, so I'd never scrolled down. I scrolled down now. There were 3 credit cards I had never opened. One from when I was 19, one from when I was 23, and one opened 14 months ago while I was a grown adult with my own apartment and my own life. All 3 carrying my name and my social security number and an authorized user I didn't recognize until I did. The mailing address on the most recent one was my parents' house. The balances came to just under $39,000, and the charges were the wallpaper of a life I had paid for without ever living. Restaurants I'd never eaten in, a cruise I'd never taken, furniture in a house I didn't live in, my brother's tuition the year my parents claimed they were tightening their belts. They hadn't just taken my college fund when I was a kid. They had been wearing my name like a coat the whole time, charging their comfortable life to a future they assumed I'd never check. I printed all of it. I added it to the file with the affidavit. And I'll be honest, that was the moment the last soft thing in me went quiet. Up until then, there was a part of me that wondered if I was the cruel one, if I was overreacting, if family was supposed to be forgiven. The credit report ended that argument. You can forgive a person. You cannot keep paying their bills and call that forgiveness. That's just funding your own erasure. 2 nights later, the blue and red lights came up my street. I was at my kitchen table when the cruisers pulled in. 2 of them, and my phone lit up with a text from my brother that just said, "This is for your own good." I knew immediately what they'd done, because it's exactly what I would have predicted if a client had described this family to me. They'd called for a welfare check. They'd told a dispatcher their sister was unstable off her medication, threatening to hurt herself, possibly armed. Because if the police dragged me out of my house screaming and crying, if there were officers in a hold in a hospital, then they could walk into a courtroom with a sympathetic story and petition for an emergency conservatorship. Control of my finances. Control of the house. Control of the person who kept saying no. They wanted me to be the hysterical woman they'd already described. They wanted my behavior to confirm their lie. I have spent my whole career walking into rooms where everyone has already decided who I am, and the only weapon that ever worked was being so calm it rearranged their assumptions. So I didn't panic. I went to my closet. I put on a blazer over the t-shirt I'd been wearing. I clipped my hair back. I put on my glasses and a headset, and I opened my laptop and started a recorded video call with no one, a spreadsheet maximized and reflecting in my lenses, and I picked up a notepad. When the knock came, hard, the announcement loud, I didn't run to the door. I walked mid-sentence, talking into the headset about reconciling a vendor ledger before end of quarter. I opened the door with a pen in my hand and mild irritation on my face. 2 officers stood there, hands resting near their belts, braced for whatever they'd been told to expect. I tapped the headset, gave them an apologetic one-moment finger, and said into the mic that I'd have to call them back. Something had come up. Then I looked at the officers and asked, politely, if I could help them. I said I was on a call with a client in another time zone and I'd appreciate it if we could be quick. They looked at me. Cardigan, glasses, steaming mug on the table behind me, a tidy kitchen, soft lamplight, a laptop open to a spreadsheet. Then they looked back over their shoulders toward the end of the driveway, where my mother was sobbing into my brother's chest and my sister-in-law was pointing at the house and saying something about a gun, and the contrast was so violent it did all my work for me. One officer's hand drifted away from his belt. "Ma'am," the older one said carefully, "we got a call about a person in crisis at this address, possibly armed, threatening self-harm." I let myself laugh, short and surprised, the laugh of a reasonable person hearing something absurd. "The only thing I'm armed with is a third-quarter close," I said. I stepped back and gestured at my kitchen so they could see all of it. "My family is going through some financial trouble," I told them. "I declined to give them money tonight. I'm guessing this is what that looks like now. I'm sorry they wasted your time." The officer looked at my parents again, who had started arguing with each other, and then at my brother, who'd gone the specific shade of red that men get when a plan they were sure of is coming apart in public. The officer pulled out a notepad and asked me a few quiet questions, and I answered all of them the way you answer when you have nothing to hide, and after a few minutes he closed the pad and apologized for the disturbance and said they'd be clearing this as unfounded. I thanked him and asked just as evenly if they'd mind asking my family to leave my property. I watched from the window as the officers walked down to the driveway, as my father's face went purple as my sister-in-law stamped her foot, as the two of them were informed that filing a false report and misusing emergency services was its own crime and that they should go home now. They went home. My hands were perfectly steady when I closed the blinds. Then I called a number I'd saved almost 3 years earlier and had never used. The man who answered had a voice like a gravel road. His name was Whitaker, and he was the kind of attorney other attorneys are afraid of. And 3 years ago, the last time my family had hinted that the lake house should really belong to all of us, I'd done a quiet thing that I told myself was just due diligence. I'd checked the public records on my parents' house. I'd found they were 2 years behind on their property taxes, which is the sort of thing that happens to people who fund their lifestyle on a stolen credit line. And when the county put the tax debt up at auction, the way counties do, I bought the lien through a holding company with a name that meant nothing to anyone. I'd paid the back taxes they couldn't, and I'd waited, the way I wait for everything, patiently, watching a clock only I could see. "Whitaker," I said, "it's Harlow. The welfare check didn't take. They're calling it a false report." "Good," he said. "So we're proceeding. Check the redemption period on the lien," I told him. I heard him turn a page. "The statutory redemption window on the tax lien closed at midnight last night," he said. "They never redeemed it. They never even called the county. As of this morning, the holding company can move to foreclose and take title." I let out a breath. I think I'd been holding since I was 17 years old and watched a withdrawal slip slide across the kitchen table. "File it," I said. "I don't want the money. I want the deed." 4 days later, I walked into Whitaker's office on the top floor of a glass building downtown, where the air conditioning was cold enough to keep meat and the floors were marble and my heels counted off the seconds like a metronome. My family had demanded this meeting. After the welfare check fell apart, they'd hired a strip mall attorney and filed for the emergency conservatorship anyway, citing my erratic behavior and the police visit they themselves had manufactured, asking a judge to put my brother in charge of my money before anyone could look too closely. Whitaker had gotten the emergency hearing blocked and forced the whole thing into private arbitration, which my family heard as a chance to settle quietly, and which I heard as a closed room with a court reporter in it. They were already seated when I came in. My brother at the head of the table like he'd reserved it. My mother beside him with her purse held against her like a shield, wearing the worried mother face I'd seen 1,000 times. My sister-in-law next to her, and Tristan at the far end looking like he hadn't slept, because the audit was Monday and it was Thursday and he was 48 hours from a very different kind of room. Whitaker sat at the opposite end like something that had learned to wear a suit, and beside him a court reporter waited over her machine. Their lawyer stood up and started talking about the conservatorship agreement. How it was all drawn up, my brother, as guardian of the estate. "Just sign here." I walked past him without a word, pulled out the chair across from my brother, and sat. I set one thin folder on the table. No greeting. I asked where the meeting room's other party was, and Whitaker said everyone was present, and I said good. "We're not here to give you a check," I said. We're here to correct the record. My brother demanded to know what I was talking about. My sister-in-law said something sharp about my behavior, about the police, about how I clearly needed help. My mother dabbed at a dry eye and said they only wanted what was best for me. And Whitaker cleared his throat and said, in the flattest voice I've ever heard, that everything spoken in this room was under oath and on the record, and that they should proceed. They didn't even flinch. That's how sure they were. The court reporter took their names, and then their lawyer prompted them, and one by one they testified. My mother said I'd been struggling for years, that I had episodes, that I'd promised the family money from my nephew's business venture and then turned erratic and dangerous. My brother nodded along and said I imagined things, that I'd always been fragile, that he was only trying to protect his sister and his son. Every word went into the record clean and permanent, exactly as I'd hoped, because what they were doing, in their certainty, was committing perjury into a machine that doesn't forget. When my mother finished swearing that the money had been a promised investment and that I'd offered it freely, Whitaker reached over and pressed a button, and the screen on the wall came alive. Exhibit A, Tristan's affidavit, blown up 4 feet tall, the reason field highlighted in yellow. His own words, his own signature, the timestamp glowing beside it. Withdrawal of company funds without authorization, repaid to resolve the discrepancy before the scheduled review. The room went very quiet. Mr. Privelant, Tristan, Whitaker said mildly, why did your family testify these funds were a business investment when you signed a sworn statement under penalty of perjury describing them as repayment of unauthorized withdrawals? Tristan stopped breathing. The color left his face in a single wave. He stammered, he looked at his father, and then he made the only move left to a cornered person, which was to throw someone else under the wheels. She told me to write that, he said. She said it was a tax thing. So you're testifying that you committed tax fraud, Whitaker said, without raising his voice, or that you committed embezzlement. Choose carefully. You're on the record either way. Tristan's mouth closed. Whitaker clicked again. Exhibit B, a timeline. 10 years across the bottom and rising out of it 3 credit accounts, statement after statement, my name at the top of every one. The signatures on the applications, enlarged, set beside a sample of my mother's handwriting from a card she'd signed for my birthday. $39,000, Whitaker said. Accounts opened in your daughter's name without her knowledge or consent. That's federal identity theft, wire fraud, mail fraud, given the intercepted statements, and the statute of limitations has not run on the most recent 5 years of charges. My mother made a sound like a kicked dog and grabbed my brother's arm. My brother surged half out of his chair and shouted that they had raised me, that they were owed, that everything I had came from them. You are owed nothing, I said. It was the first time my voice had risen the entire meeting, and it didn't rise much. You stole my name. You wore it for 10 years. That carries a mandatory minimum in federal prison, and I have every statement. My brother sat back down. Whitaker clicked one last time. Exhibit C, a deed. My brother leaned forward and squinted at it, and I watched the exact second he recognized his own address. That's my house, he said, and his voice cracked on the word my. Look at the owner, I said. The owner was a holding company. I told them about the tax lien in the plainest language I could, the way I'd explain it to a jury. I told them I'd bought their tax debt 3 years ago through a company they'd never heard of, that I'd paid the back taxes they were too busy spending my credit to pay, that the redemption period had quietly run out 2 nights ago while they were busy sending the police to my door. My mother whispered with this awful flicker of hope, "You saved the house?" "No," I said. "I bought it. You didn't redeem. It's mine now. I didn't pay your mortgage. I foreclosed. You've been living in my house for 3 years and you didn't even know it." Then everything came apart at once. The way it always does. The shouting and my brother lunging across the table and Tristan grabbing for the laptop like cracking the screen would crack the truth, and my mother wailing about family. The word family. As if it were a magic word that had ever once worked on me, and the court reporter calmly recording every threat and every slip of the tongue. Whitaker stood up and said one word, "Sit," and they sat, all of them, small and gray and finally afraid, and he slid a thick document down the length of the table. "This is a confession of judgment and a mutual no-contact agreement," I said, and I put my finger on the signature lines one at a time. "You acknowledge the 39,000 in identity theft. You repay it on a schedule my attorney sets. You vacate my lake house claim, you drop the conservatorship, and you stay 500 feet from me, my home, and my office, permanently. You come closer than that, you go to jail. And if we don't sign," my sister-in-law whispered. "Then Exhibit A goes to the district attorney tonight," I said, "and Exhibit B goes to the FBI field office, and Tristan is arrested before his audit on Monday, and the rest of you are arrested for the identity theft and the false police report shortly after." I'd already drafted both emails. The recipients were already in the address line. I just hadn't pressed send. My brother looked at me for a long moment, searching my face for the sister he used to be able to move around like furniture. The responsible one. The spare tire. The wallet with a face. She wasn't in there anymore. I'm not sure she'd ever really been who they thought. His hand shook as he signed. My mother signed with tears running down her cheeks that I no longer felt anything about. My sister-in-law signed. Tristan signed last, staring at the table while the rest of his 20s dissolved into ink. I picked up the folder. I stood. I walked out of that cold marble room and down 40-some floors and out onto the street, and the city air hit me warm and loud and full of strangers who didn't know my last name. And I stood on the sidewalk and breathed it in like I just surfaced from somewhere deep. I blocked all 4 numbers before I reached my car. The rest happened fast, the way the end always does once the structure goes. Tristan's company found the discrepancy anyway, because I made sure, anonymously, that the right line item landed on the right desk before Monday. He was terminated and quietly charged, and the family found out the hard way that I had decided to let the law have him after all. Which is what a lot of people had wanted, and what I'd wanted too once I stopped pretending I owed him softness. My parents and my brother repaid the debt on the schedule because the alternative was a federal indictment with my evidence stapled to it. I sold the lake house 6 months later to a young couple who cried when they saw the water, and the money paid off the last of the debt my family had stolen in my name and covered the deposit on an apartment in a city 1,100 miles away where I knew exactly no one. People ask me, when this comes up, whether I feel guilty, whether it was too far, whether blood is blood, and I tell them the truth, which is that I spent 31 years being the responsible one, and the most responsible thing I ever did was stop being responsible for people who only ever held me responsible for their mistakes. I sleep in a house that's mine, with credit that's mine, under a name that finally only means me. I'm not lonely. I had to become the villain in their story to stop being the casualty in it. If you've ever been the one your family reaches for only when something needs paying, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this travels. For 31 years, I answered to a name that wasn't really mine. Not Harlow, the name on my birth certificate, but the other one, the role they pinned on me before I could spell it, the responsible one. I used to think it was a compliment. It took me most of my life to understand it was a sentence, the kind a judge hands down, and I'd been serving it without ever standing trial. Here is the thing nobody tells you about a family like mine. Every action they took had a cost, and they simply agreed, quietly, that I would be the one to pay it. My brother totaled a car, and the cost landed on me. Tristan took money that wasn't his, and the cost was supposed to land on me too. My grandmother's lake house liquidated to patch a hole he'd dug. That's how it always worked. 'Cause on their side, consequence on mine. The day I finally refused to absorb the consequence was the day the whole arrangement collapsed, because it had never been built to survive me saying no. I want to be honest about what saved me, because it wasn't luck and it wasn't rage. Rage would have had me screaming at my mother in my office that first afternoon, and screaming would have handed them exactly the unstable woman they wanted to describe to a judge. What saved me was 3 things I'd spent years building without naming them. The first was knowing where the line was and refusing to step over it in a way that would cost me my own integrity. I could have hired someone to make my family disappear, the way a few people in the comments will joke about. I didn't. I made them sign their own truth and let the law do the rest. There's a difference between justice and revenge, and the difference is whether you can still recognize yourself afterward. The second was patience that looked like nothing from the outside. Buying that tax lien 3 years early wasn't genius. It was just paying attention, reading the fine print of my own life the way I read it for strangers, and being willing to wait for a clock only I could see. Cleverness isn't a lightning strike. It's mostly noticing what's in front of you while everyone else is too comfortable to look. The third was the hardest, and it was simply not breaking. There were nights at that hotel front desk at 19 when I could have quit, years when staying soft would have been easier than staying standing. I didn't fold then, and I didn't fold when the police lights came up my street. You don't build that overnight. You build it one refusal at a time. So if you're the one your family only reaches for when something needs paying, hear me. You are allowed to be good without being a doormat. You are allowed to be smart without being cold. And you are allowed to be strong without being loud. I don't talk to any of them now, and the quiet isn't empty. It's just finally, after 31 years, mine.